Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast.
Hello and welcome again to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast. This episode is the third and final part of my extended conversation with Avro doyen John Nichol. We pick up the story in 1985, when his career starts to take him to other British aerospace sites than Woodford, such as Hadfield, Filton and Weybridge. He works on Nimrod and VC10 conversions, makes a visit to RAF Kinloss with a colleague that causes an unexpected stir, and does a lot of work on the Jetstream 41, including undertaking a crashworthiness report for the Civil Aviation Authority. And in nostalgic mood, he recalls the important social side of working in an aircraft company. He ends on a note of moving pride, with the thought that he is one of the happy few, that sadly dwindling band of brothers who were not Hawker Siddeley, nor British Aerospace, nor BAE Systems apprentices, but Avro apprentices.
In 1985, I had the opportunity. They were looking for two people in what was then known as the Mechanical Systems Department. And there were two positions, a position on the mechanical side and a position on the furnishing side. I think there was myself and one other guy applied on the mechanical, and I got it. I did hear that the other person was already a grade 6 within design, and I was a 5. And I did hear that had he gone in as a 6, it might have caused waves amongst some of the rest of them. But who knows? Me being a 5 didn't cause the waves the same. But mechanical systems, they were very sort of up at the beginning of a project and the systems within. So they would come up with a sort of a theoretical system and deciding on what was required in terms of pipe diameters, valves, pumps, this, that or the other, whatever it was, do all the calculations because they were clever people. It would then get put out to the drawing office to convert into a practical installation. Now, my background was not academic the same as a lot of the guys, the younger guys who were university people. A number of the other people were just long-term guys who've been there from, almost post early days of the Vulcan, for example, but were not academic type people. They were just experienced and were very, very good. But I fitted in quite well, and it was a really good move for me. And I tended to get involved mainly with the fuel systems, I would say, particularly with the Nimrod and the 146 and sometimes ATP. Sometimes issues on the shop floor where the guys were probably calibrating fuel system on the aircraft and they got struggling a bit with the calibration units, so I'd go out there and give them a bit of a hand. But one of the things with being in that department was, for one thing, I was sent on a 2-week course to Rolls-Royce at Derby to learn about the Rolls-Royce Spey engine, which was used on the Nimrod. And so that was very useful. But it allowed me, for various reasons, to get around different sites. I mean, Hadfield, for example, Filton down by Bristol, Weybridge, when there was the handover of the VC10 work, and that would have been about, 1987-ish, roughly. I went down there a few times to pick up some of the fuel system stuff on the VC10, ultimately for about 20-odd years in service support and so on and so on. But the fuel system on the VC10 was hellish complicated. I mean, it was probably bad enough on the traditional one, but with the tanker version, dear goodness, it got me out to places like RAF Kinloss, Waddington, down to Bryce Norton, Boscombe Down, St Athan in South Wales. But just, for example, the RAF Kinloss trip was quite interesting. During the Falklands episode in 1982, I was still in the drawing office at that that point, but the design had been split up into two sections. The first lot did the conversion of Nimrod to permit them to do air-to-air refuel, receive fuel in the air. And it was all done so quickly and correctly, but it involved the main fuel hose having come off the back of the probe on the top. It actually went through the cabin area where all the guys at the consoles were working. It then disappeared through a hole down and joined the fuel galleries forward of the front spar. Now, I, at that time, was on the Vulcan tanker conversion, and I remember I must have been having a bad day one day. I was in one of the bomb bays of one of the 6 Vulcans we did, and I was there with my piece of paper and pencil and ruler, and I was checking something. I remember this guy came into the bomb bay, and he was sort of, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And I really let off with both barrels, really. And who is this guy? And a bit later I was explaining, and then somebody's back in the office. Do you not realise who that was? And I think he was one of the superintendents or something. Anyway, I have seen him subsequently at the museum, and reminded him, because I asked him, do you recognise me? And anyway, I did go and apologise to him subsequently to his office. I said, I'm sorry, that I went off on one. I didn't realise who you were, but that's no excuse. But that was then. Anyway, with the Nimrod conversion, ultimately, and it must have been quite late on in the 80s, up at Kinloss, we had a contractors working party. So they were company employees, but they were permanently there doing mods and things like that. So rather than bring the aircraft to Woodford, they do it there. They live there, yeah. And they did the first conversion, the productionized version of the air-to-air refueling, and that involved the fuel piping then not going through the cabin. They dropped it down into the bomb bay, the forward pannier, proper metal piping and so on. And what happened, myself and my colleague Peter Caldwell, we had to go up to Kinloss. So I remember driving up there on the Sunday, and there was we couldn't get in the normal hotel up there near Kinloss. There was a NATO exercise. All the hotels were full, so we went over to Elgin, got set up there, went down to Kinloss on the Monday. They weren't ready for us, so I said to Peter, we've got Loch Ness down the road. It'd be rude not to go down there, would it? While we're doing it. So we went for a drive around there back. On the Tuesday, we went down to Kinloss, and the idea was they would connect a fuel bowser up to the probe. And anyway, Peter decided, this was February time, but they had a microclimate around Kinloss, around the Moray Firth. Yeah, the weather wasn't bad. And he decided he'd stand by the bowser. I'd go and sit at the flight engineers panel, and they'd start pumping fuel in. He'd be looking at pressures and flows by the bowser, and I'd be looking at all the dials of the fuel tanks, the distribution, this, that and the other, and so on. I was in a nice comfy position. Anyway, we must have done that more than once, but I remember one occasion at lunchtime we decided we'd go to the mess for a bit of lunch, and when we came back there was this peculiar atmosphere. And where was everybody? Looking around, deserted. So we eventually found the company rep. I said, Jack, what's going on? He said, there's been a security alert. Wow, what? He said, well, they found this unattended briefcase near the front of the Nimrod. Right. Peter had left it there when we went for lunch. Yeah, well, he only did that once. So wonder they didn't blow it up. Anyway, that was interesting. Waddington was... when this would be about 1996, been one of the 3 R1 Nimrods had crashed in the Moray Firth, and they had to very rapidly convert a traditional Nimrod, an MR Nimrod, into an R1, which took probably about a year or so. And at this time, I'd actually moved on back to Chadderton, but I'd left here at the end of 95 and started back at Chadderton for, turned out to be 4 years. And it was while I was there, I was sort of drawn back here, involved with the fuel conversion. But in that final year here at Woodford, so in 95, I'd had to go up to Prestwick. Now, I had done quite a bit of work on the Jetstream 41 for Prestwick, and I'd had a few trips up there in the Jetstream 31 here from Woodford, flying up there. But I did, for one thing, for part of the certification process of the J41, was a systems crashworthiness report for the CAA. And that was a report on what would be the impact on the systems in the aircraft should it have a survivable crash landing where you've either got no undercarriage down or any combination of the two main legs and the nose gear being up or down, so the aircraft can be any sort of position as it hit the ground. What would be the impact on some of the systems that might be damaged? Anyway, I had to write a report on this, which was accepted. But I also did some test schedules, flight test schedules and ground test schedules on the fuel system, which were done either before the aircraft flew or tests that were done in the air, I think, for the prototype, or even subsequent production aircraft. There were various tests that had to be done. So quite a bit of work. But in my final year here, before I moved back to Chadderton, they'd brought the wing manufacture for the RJ, which is development of the 146,
And this has got the name Avro again, hasn't it?
Indeed.
Revived the name Avro.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, on full circle. So the wings were brought back from America to Prestwick, and the first set that they produced, I went up there with Ken, my manager, and we had to inspect the internals of this wing to see how the system in there, were they sort of done right? And I thought, well, I thought that was an inspector's job. However, that's what we had to do, and I had to write a report on it and what we found. And we found one or two things that were a bit iffy. And I understand that they were not well pleased with the report that I wrote. But,
Well, there's no point having the report.
Well, it was honest. It was honest, yeah.
Just remind me, John, the Jetstream, that's a passenger.
Yes, Jetstream 41. It was.
The number of seats is 30.
Yes, I suppose. Well, now, did it hold quite that many? It was heading for that number. The 31 actually only held, let me think, probably only about 18 seats. So I think the 41 might have been 30-ish.
That was 30-ish.
30-ish. But it's had new engine. It was a stretch fuselage, new engines, and some new systems and things. I'm not sure how many they made in the end, but it was a nice looking aeroplane, and they had a massive fanfare and do when it was and it came through all the smoke and things and all the and there were videos done and all sorts of things. It was really quite impressive, but I don't know how many they built in the end. But yes, I did my final 4 years back at Chadderton, so that sort of completed the circle again till the end of '99, and that was. In the first instance, I was supposed to be technically vetting the maintenance manuals for the VC10, little packages of work from the technical people just reading through, were there any obvious things not quite right? Yeah, there might have been 5-hour jobs, 10-hour jobs, nice little packages. You could, yeah, right, okay, next job, please. But there were certain other things not associated with the VC10, some Nimrod work, and that kept me going for 4 years, and then I called it a day, and I think 36 years, I suppose, from beginning to end. Well, I can say it's been a lifetime, but just 36 out of my 81 years.
And what was there a good social side?
Oh, yeah.
Were there works outings and social evenings and things? Was that?
Well, there was the there was the Lancaster Club at Chadderton, as there was, which was over at Failsworth. And there was the motor club. I was involved with the motor club as well. We used to have little treasure hunts and things. And in fact, I was the tool secretary at one point, because down here, certainly when we moved to Woodford, we had a building allocated, and we built up a stock of tools that members could borrow. Socket sets, spring clamps if you're trying to compress your coil springs on your suspension, all sorts of things. Exhaust gas analyzers for just setting your carburetor just to give the right exhaust gas, and all sorts of things. There was a sailing club. There was a gliding club, of course, which I was involved with 63, 64. I was still at Chadderton then. We had a gardening club, and we used to buy bulk quantities of fertilizers and things like that, and then decant it into smaller bags and sell it at lunch times. Oh yeah, there was numerous things going on. Quite a few. When a certain general manager came along, I don't know whether I can mention his name, but he decided that some of these things were sort of getting in the way. The sailing club. Well, there wasn't a lot of water around the airfield actually, but I think they just stored the dinghies in there. But that disappeared with pretty well everything else. Model aircraft club, which I got a little bit involved with. Yeah, there was there was quite a bit going on. In fact, I remember a trip to the Bellevue Zoo, and goodness, that must have been, well, I remember we took our daughter, and that could have been early 70s maybe when that happened. And they used to have a Christmas concert in the canteen. They'd have a comedian, and all senior ranks were on the front row there, and of course the comedian would take the mickey out of them and all the rest of it. There was...
Good. John, It's been a privilege and a pleasure to hear that fascinating story. I'm conscious of taking up a huge amount of your time. So
it's all right, yeah.
I'm going to finish off with one thing, and just to throw this at you, just complete my sentence. When I hear the word Avro, I think of ... What's the image or the memory or the period that perhaps really comes to mind?
Well, I suppose there'd be that time when it was still known as Avro. So from my point of view, it was 1960. It became the Avro Whitworth Division in 63. That eventually faded away. And of course, then when the whole setup, Hawker Civil Aviation, and it was nationalised, became British Aerospace in the 70s. And I suppose it came back again a little bit when my involvement with the building the Row 1 triplane, which started about 2005 until 2009 when we completed it. So there was that connection with the earliest of days with Avro. That Row 1 triplane, original 1909, when that first flew. And of course, meeting up with Eric Verdenroe and Bobby, his brother. I remember them coming up to Woodford in the early days of talking about the triplane, because they'd sponsored it. So there'd been that connection, and just being able to say, I think, that yes, I was an Avro apprentice, and there's so few of us left. There's so few of us left. In fact, I can only think of, at the museum here at Woodford, 2 people. I've been speaking to one of them this morning, who was an Avro apprentice. I think after that, of course, and it's an age thing, naturally, those who've been with the company started as Hawker Siddeley. I was an Avro apprentice.
Thank you so much to John for chatting with us for that long conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Listen out in future episodes for more conversations with Avro royalty when I talk to Harry Holmes and Eric Harlin, 2 of the inspirational promoters of Avro heritage preservation, who started the process many years ago that ultimately led to the establishment of the museum as we see it today. Do try and join me for that, but in the meantime, it's goodbye from me, Chris Beswick. Don't forget to keep listening.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.